The arrival of the invincible fleet. The darkness of space was torn apart by the sudden emergence of thousands of warships, their golden hulls gleaming against the light of Sol. The Vaeri Empire, conquerors of over 100 worlds, had arrived. Their fleet was unlike anything humanity had ever seen. Colossal capital ships, sleek destroyers bristling with weapons, and carrier-class behemoths that could launch entire armies onto unsuspecting planets. At the heart of this overwhelming force was the Imperial Dreadnought Eternal Dominion, a ship so massive that even Earth's moon would seem small beside it. It was not just a warship, it was a symbol of absolute power. No species had ever stood against the Vaeri and survived. Inside the Grand Command Deck, Supreme Warlord Rethos Kvaris sat upon his throne-like command chair, his violet eyes gleaming with a mix of arrogance and amusement. The people of Earth had been given one final chance to surrender peacefully and accept the rule of the Empire. But, as expected, their response had been filled with pride, defiance, and foolish bravado. "Sir, we have arrived at the Sol system," one of his adjutants reported. "Human sensors have detected us, and their planetary defenses are activating." Kvaris chuckled, his deep voice carrying across the silent bridge. "Of course they are. It is in their nature to struggle before they break." He stood, towering over his officers, his ornate ceremonial war cloak flowing behind him. "Begin transmission to the leaders of Earth." A holographic screen flared to life before him, revealing the face of Admiral Eric Salazar, Supreme Commander of Earth's Defense Forces. To Kvaris' mild surprise, the man was calm. Most planetary leaders would be begging at this point. Some would be desperately bargaining for their survival. But this human, he was watching, analyzing. Kvaris smiled. "Admiral Salazar, you already know who I am. You already know why we are here." He gestured toward the massive fleet behind him. "This is the might of the Vaeri Empire, the greatest armada ever assembled. You stand at the precipice of history. Will your people embrace unity, or shall they be reduced to a mere lesson in our records?" Salazar leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. His uniform was crisp, his expression unreadable. "That's quite the fleet you have, Warlord." Kvaris narrowed his eyes slightly. He was expecting fear, not this. Salazar continued, "Your empire has quite the reputation. You've conquered more than 100 worlds, expanded your borders for centuries. No one has stopped you before." He tilted his head slightly, his voice calm and unreadable. "But tell me, Warlord, have you ever lost?" The command bridge fell into an uneasy silence. Kvaris could feel his officers shifting, confused by the human's demeanor. The Supreme Warlord smirked. "We do not lose, Admiral. We advance. We evolve. We conquer." Salazar exhaled, as if he had just heard the most predictable answer in the universe. "Right," he said. "Well, that's disappointing." Kvaris frowned. "Excuse me." Salazar leaned forward. "I was hoping for a real challenge." The room went dead silent. Kvaris stared at the human, confusion creeping into his mind for the first time. What game was this Admiral playing? "I see that you don't understand." Salazar continued, his voice eerily relaxed. "You think you're here to conquer, that this will be just another war for your empire." Kvaris crossed his arms. "And you believe it will not." Salazar took a deep breath and smiled. Not an arrogant smirk, not a nervous bluff. A genuine, amused smile. "Oh, Warlord," he said, chuckling. "You have no idea what you've just walked into." The Vaeri's first mistake. Kvaris felt an uncomfortable shift in the air. He was used to fear, to please, to desperate last stands from civilizations who didn't know they had already lost. But this was something else entirely. "Sir," a Vaeri officer interrupted urgently, "our long-range sensors are malfunctioning." Kvaris turned sharply. "Malfunctioning? Impossible. The officer's hands flew across the holographic controls, his bioluminescent skin flashing with stress. We don't know what's happening. Our readings are fluctuating. Kavaris growled. Explain. Another officer called out, his voice shaken. Supreme Warlord, we appear to be in two places at once. Kavaris froze. What? The officer pointed at the view screen. We are detecting our own fleet in multiple positions simultaneously. It's as if. He hesitated. Kavaris took a step closer. As if what? The officer swallowed. As if space itself is being manipulated around us. Kavaris turned back to the holographic projection of Salazar. The human was still smiling. Admiral, the warlord said slowly, measuring his words. What have you done? Salazar exhaled through his nose. We learned something very important about space travel a long time ago, Warlord. While you were building bigger ships, while you were expanding outward, we were, well, he gestured vaguely. We were learning how to bend reality itself. Kavaris clenched his jaw. You're lying. Salazar shrugged. Am I? Before the warlord could respond, the main view screen flickered and then split. On one half, it showed the Eternal Dominion, right where it should be. On the other, it showed that same ship hovering over Neptune. Impossible, one of Kavaris' officers whispered. Salazar shook his head. No, Warlord. Inevitable. Kavaris felt something foreign and unwelcome slither into his mind. Doubt. Humanity's trap has been sprung. The Empire had come to crush humanity. But now, the Empire was realizing it was already caught. Sir, another officer screamed. Some of our ships are disappearing from our sensors. Kavaris snarled. Find them. The officer shook his head, eyes wide with terror. I don't think we can. The fleet was still there, physically present. But it was also not there. Salazar let out a quiet laugh. You thought you were the hunters, he said, voice tripping with amusement. But you were already in the web. Kavaris stepped forward, clenching his fists. You think you can intimidate us with illusions. Salazar's smile vanished. Oh, Warlord, he whispered, his voice now devoid of humor. I don't think you understand what's happening. He leaned in, his next words cutting through the tension like a blade. This isn't an illusion. You're already lost. And for the first time in his entire life, Supreme Warlord Kavaris felt fear. The illusion of power. The bridge of the Eternal Dominion was eerily silent. The proud Vaeri officers, once so confident, were now staring at their instruments in disbelief. The Vaeri Empire had never experienced this before, a battle where the enemy had not fired a single shot, yet their mighty fleet was already fracturing. Warlord Kavaris clenched his fists, his violet eyes narrowing as he glared at the view screen. The human admiral, Eric Salazar, was still there, watching, not attacking, not pleading, just watching. As if this was all just entertainment to him. Kavaris' voice was slow, deliberate. Admiral Salazar, I do not know what tricks you are playing, but make no mistake, our forces will crush your resistance. Salazar tilted his head slightly. What forces? Kavaris felt a chill crawl up his spine. He turned back to his tactical officer, who was frantically tapping at the controls. Status of the fleet. The officer's hands trembled as he read the data. Sir, our ships are being displaced. Kavaris' jaw clenched. Displaced. What does that mean? The officer swallowed hard. It means they are where they should be, but they are also somewhere else. The warlord marched to the control panel, his ornate armor clanking against the polished floor. His fingers flew over the interface, scanning the readings, and his blood ran cold. The Eternal Dominion was currently orbiting Earth, and also hovering above Neptune, and simultaneously on the edge of the Sol system. Kavaris stared at the data. This was impossible. These readings are wrong, he barked. The fleet is here. I can see it. But then something even more terrifying happened. One of the Vaeri warships, a colossal battleship, the Valkyris Wrath, suddenly blinked out of existence, right in front of them. One moment, the mighty warship was there, a beacon of imperial strength. And the next, gone, not destroyed, not exploded, simply erased from reality. A hollow, stunned silence fell across the command deck. Kavaris felt his throat tighten. Find that ship. Now. The officer scrambled at his console, his bioluminescent skin flashing erratic patterns of distress. Sir, we can't. It's just gone. Another officer, voice shaking, whispered, Sir, are we even in control of our own fleet anymore? Kavaris whirled back toward Salazar, his rage boiling over. What have you done? Salazar sighed, shaking his head. You still don't get it, do you? The view screen flickered, and suddenly, the bridge of the Eternal Dominion was filled with dozens of copies of Admiral Salazar. Each image of him stood in a slightly different position, speaking with the same voice but half a second apart, overlapping like an echo across time. This is not a battle, they said. This is not a war. This is a lesson. Kavaris staggered back, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. He drew his ceremonial war blade in fury. I will have your head for this, human. And then, Salazar laughed. Not a nervous chuckle, not a mocking sneer, a deep, genuine laugh, as if the very idea of Kavaris threatening him was amusing. And then he spoke. You have already lost, Warlord. Kavaris raised his blade to strike the view screen, but his arm froze. Literally froze. He couldn't move. His fingers would not respond. His legs were locked in place. Panic surged in his chest. What is this? What have you doing to me? Salazar's many copies all tilted their heads in eerie unison. Tell me, Warlord, what would you do if you were no longer in control of your own body? Kavaris gritted his teeth, struggling to move. His muscles refused to obey him. His officers were watching in horrified silence, none daring to speak. Salazar sighed, his image returning to just one version of himself. You see, Warlord, you assumed this was a conventional war. That we would meet your fleet in battle, that we would exchange fire, that this would be just another conquest for your records. He leaned forward, his eyes glinting with something dangerous. But humanity does not play by your rules. Kavaris' breath hitched. Salazar continued. While you were building bigger ships, we were learning how to manipulate space-time itself. He gestured vaguely. What you're experiencing now, that's just a taste of what we can do. Right now, your body exists in several places at once. That's why you can't move. You are slightly phased across multiple realities. Kavaris felt his heart race. He could still think. His mind was free, but his body was trapped in a fragmented existence. Salazar's voice softened. You are beginning to understand now, aren't you? Kavaris' mind screamed. This is impossible. And yet, it was happening. Salazar exhaled, shaking his head. Warlord, the real question isn't whether you can win this war. His expression turned deadly. The question is whether I decide to let you go home. The implications hit Kavaris like a collapsing star. The Vaeri had brought 3,000 warships to crush humanity. And instead, humanity had already crushed them without firing a single shot. A Vaeri officer suddenly gasped, pointing at the view screen. Sir, more of our ships are vanishing. Kavaris' eyes snapped to the display. Another Imperial battleship blinked out of existence. Then another. And another. Each ship disappeared without an explosion, without a trace. Kavaris felt something alien and terrible seep into his chest. Fear. Salazar's smirk widened. This is your last chance, Warlord. The Eternal Dominion trembled as more ships disappeared into nothingness. Turn around. Take your fleet. what's left of it, and go, never come back. Caveris felt his stomach churn. His entire fleet was crumbling, unraveling, and he didn't even know how to fight back. Salazar's voice turned cold. Or you can stay and watch your entire empire vanish. Caveris' eyes darted around, looking for an answer, for an escape. But there was only one option left. He swallowed his pride, his hatred, and his fear. All ships. His voice cracked. Withdraw from Sol. Immediately. Salazar leaned back, satisfied. Good boy. As the Imperial fleet fled, the Vaeri finally understood. They had brought the largest invasion force in history, and humanity had never even considered them a threat. They had only been toying with them, and that was a lesson the Empire would never forget. The Empire retreats, but humanity watches. The mighty Vaeri Imperial fleet, once a symbol of unmatched dominance, was now in full retreat. One by one, the massive golden warships vanished into hyperspace, their proud captains silent and humiliated. They had not lost a battle. They had not lost a war. They had lost the illusion that they were the apex of the galaxy. Supreme Warlord Caveris sat in horrified silence aboard the Eternal Dominion, his once unbreakable confidence shattered. The fleet had been undone, not by superior firepower, not by numbers, but by something far worse. By something the Vaeri could not understand. By humanity. The fleeting grip of power. As his fleet's surviving warships fled toward the outer rim of the Sol system, Caveris finally found his voice. Status. He growled, his throat raw with anger. One of his officers, a young Vaeri lieutenant who had never seen war before, looked up from the chaotic display of data, his face pale and shaken. "Yes, sir," the officer stammered, his bioluminescent skin flickering erratically. "We have lost 47 ships." Caveris slammed his fist onto the console, his violet eyes burning. How? Those ships were not destroyed. The officer flinched. They vanished. Supreme Warlord. Caveris turned toward his chief science officer, a veteran who had once studied the most advanced phenomena in the Empire. "You," Caveris snarled. "Explain this. Now." The science officer's fingers trembled as he tapped on the holodisplay. "Sir, I have no explanation." Caveris hated those words. No Vaeri scientist had ever failed to explain something before. But this was beyond their understanding. Impossible. Caveris muttered. He had to believe that. He had to believe there was a way to make sense of this madness. And yet, deep down for the first time in his 500-year rule, Caveris felt something alien. Not frustration. Not anger. Not even humiliation. Fear. A war they never saw coming. The Eternal Dominion sensors pinged with a new warning. Caveris snapped his head toward the tactical officer. Now what? The officer's eyes widened in horror. "Sir, the humans." Caveris' stomach twisted. "They're following us." On the holographic display, the human fleet had not moved an inch. They were still in Earth's orbit, but somehow, they were also here. The officer's voice was shaky. "We are detecting human ships at multiple locations across the system. They are observing us." Caveris felt a cold sweat form on his brow. "They are watching us flee." Even in retreat, even as the Empire licked its wounds, the humans made sure they felt their presence. A transmission in the dark. A soft chime echoed across the bridge. Another incoming message from Earth. Caveris stiffened. His entire bridge crew watched him carefully, waiting for his command. For a moment, he hesitated. Every instinct told him to ignore it, to pretend this humiliation had never happened. But something deep in his gut told him he needed to hear what the humans had to say. "Put it through," Caveris growled. The holographic screen flickered to life, and there was Admiral Eric Salazar. Calm, unshaken, still watching. like a predator who had just let its prey escape, but only for now. Supreme Warlord, Salazar greeted smoothly. I see you're leaving. Kavaris said nothing. Salazar continued, I'll admit, I was curious to see if you would actually try to fight. But I think we both know now. That would have been a mistake. Kavaris' jaw tightened. What? Are you human? Salazar raised an eyebrow. You already know the answer to that. Kavaris felt his fingers curl into a fist. You're monsters, he spat. You violate the laws of reality. You are an abomination. Salazar smirked. Funny, that's what every other species has said before they lost to us. Kavaris gritted his teeth, his mind racing. The Vaeri Empire had ruled the stars for millennia. And yet, this one species had shattered their entire perception of power in less than an hour. Your empire, Salazar continued, his voice almost bored, is not the first to challenge us. Kavaris' pulse pounded in his temples. And what happened to those before us? Salazar's smirk faded. They learned. Kavaris felt his breath hitch. And what? The warlord asked carefully, if we do not wish to learn. For the first time, Salazar's expression darkened. Then you will disappear, he said simply. Like the others. The words hit Kavaris like a death sentence. The message humanity sent to the galaxy. As the Eternal Dominion left the Sol system, Kavaris watched Earth shrink into the void. He had come here expecting submission. He had expected humanity to kneel. Instead, they had smiled, watched, and let him go. Not out of mercy, not out of fear, but because they didn't consider the Empire a real threat at all. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. Sir, one of his commanders whispered beside him. What do we tell the High Lords? Kavaris stared into the blackness of space, his mind haunted by the chilling words of Admiral Salazar. What do we tell them? That humanity is too strong. That they broke us. That we never stood a chance. No. The Empire must never know. Kavaris stood, straightening his cloak, his expression now unreadable. He turned toward his officers. We tell them, he said, his voice sharp and final, that we chose mercy. That was the lie he would spread. The only way to keep the Empire from realizing the terrifying truth. That the Vaeri had been defeated before the war had even begun.